what work do you think needs to be done to create a more positive relationship? And anybody can jump in on that one. I know it's a big question.
I mean, I could just say real quickly that I remember during my tenure with the police department, and I believe they still have it. They call it community policing, and community policing, I think, is really effective, and especially in the inner cities where you need more presence of the police, walking the beat, so to speak, and getting to know the neighborhoods, the people that live in the neighborhood, getting to know the merchants, the store owners. I feel that goes a long way, as opposed to driving around in the radio car, walking the beat, or even maybe driving around, park the car, and then get out and socialize with, so to speak, with the kids, socialize with people, just making your presence felt in that way, and getting to know them. I feel seriously that works. In that the same way it works if you're a cop that's out there trying to effect more arrest. If you know the people will confide in you more. If that's how it is. If they trust you, they will give you information. So a lot of these neighborhoods, they don't trust the cops because they don't know the cops. But if they get to know the cops, hey, yeah, so-and-so is the person you might be looking for, they will give up information more readily. I think most police departments need to take a look at that if they don't have that, and implement more of this community policing. Of course, it all depends on the areas that you're working in, but if it's a minority neighborhood, let's say, more police of color would be effective more, because the community will feel more comfortable, relating to the cops of color in the neighborhood. So a lot of departments maybe don't have enough, let's say, police of color, but if that's the case, they need to recruit more police of color to work in these neighborhoods where they can have that kind of relationship with the people.
I agree, the relationship, but I think we're talking about like a bigger problem in pulling the right people into the job. If you look at this panel, none of us mentioned military service, and don't get me wrong, our veterans are valuable people, and God bless them. But we're coming out of a time where you see an immense amount of your law enforcement are former military. That is a different mindset than the way we grew up with policing. We all wanted to grow up and be cops to help go solve problems. You have people coming out of literally policing Afghanistan and policing an occupying environment, and moving into now that same mindset. The citizenry, we're not the citizens of Afghanistan or of whatever, but you have to be different. You have to treat, and to Cleve's deal about, maybe putting more officers of color in those neighborhoods. I loved the neighborhood I worked. And again, I was the white cop in an all black neighborhood. And it taught me a lot about that culture and that community. And some of my fellow black officers, they didn't want to work that neighborhood because they were given such a hard time by the citizens. It was actually harder for them, and they would have preferred not to. I think it goes more to the way the people approach the job of policing versus the color, and that could just be my experience. But I think our biggest problem is and they're even incentivized. I know in federal service, if you come out of the military, you get the job ahead of other people. I'm sure that's true in New York and many others. So that's the type of mentality we're drawing in. So we have to go through a process of deprogramming that group, and again, not all of them, but if you have that history and how to police the citizens of the United States now, if you ask.
Yeah, Brody, you're correct. And just to clarify, of course, yes, you don't need, all people of color to work in neighborhoods with people of color. I mean, when you become a police officer, you're there to protect and serve, so it's a different mentality you should have than when you come in from the war zone in Afghanistan. You're not there to protect and serve. So just be, I just wanted to say that. But of course, the individual is different. Like you as a person, you can relate and you feel comfortable and you want to help, but of course doesn't make everyone else that as Caucasian feel comfortable working with blacks. I know that for a fact, my experience on a job, and it works both ways, so it like someone like yourself, you can work comfortably in a black neighborhood or a white neighborhood or Latino neighborhood, just like myself, maybe because of our martial arts training, maybe because of our exposure
Right.
in life. But then there are other officers that maybe they will take a while to adjust. And at the same time, the reason I said that is because the people in the community, it's their reaction. They will, put it this way, they will take a much longer time to warm up to you than they will to me. You're going to have to earn their trust. Where with me, per se, perhaps, they will give it more willingly. You know what I'm saying?
But then you have to take enforcement action. Did you feel like there was more of a betrayal of that then?
Actually, that's it's a different point of view. Yes, I think so, because sometimes you might be taken for granted. They will give more respect to you, more, as the person in authority, where, yeah, I'm in authority also, but they will feel more comfortable with me and maybe easier to retaliate than with you, so it's in a way, it's human psychology, how
Right.
people behave.
In Spain, they don't have the same issues that we're dealing with. Like, you don't see the whole, race thing going on over there. So she says it's hard for her to chime in on that because they have different issues.
Nosotros tenemos muchos problemas, pero el tema de la raza en España y la policía no existe.
She said that in Spain there's a lot of other issues, but the race with the police and things like that doesn't exist.
Tenemos creado en el Código Penal, existe el delito de odio, en el que se persigue concretamente tanto que se persiga por temas de raza, por tema sexual, por homosexualidad o por lo que sea, se persigue específicamente, y si hay un hecho de racismo se persigue para erradicarlo.
She says that if there's anything based on racism, that falls under what their hate crimes would be, whether it's race, gender, creed, whatever that would be. That's how they categorize all that all together.
Así también, por ejemplo, en mi unidad nos encargamos de dar charlas en los colegios para, creo que lo ha dicho Utsey and Brody, ha dicho que desde que son chiquititos vamos a dar charlas en los colegios para poder erradicarlo desde pequeños, ¿no? Pues hablar de que todos somos iguales, pues eso, para intentar que desde la base pues no se vayan contagiando con esa idea de racismo, porque he entendido algo como que los de ahora están sacando temas del pasado, ¿no? Y me ha traducido, él y me ha explicado, ¿no? Que tenéis un problema con temas del pasado. Nosotros eso es lo que estamos intentando que no exista, por eso perseguimos con esos delitos de odio para que no sigan avanzando por ahí.
She says, like, pre-COVID, like right now during COVID, she's been out on the street as a regular police officer, but pre-COVID, she was in the schools. And she was speaking to the kids about bullying and racism and things like that to try to start them off young, teaching them that those are considered crimes, that if anything later on in life, they would know that, that all hate crimes pretty much. So her job now is actually going into the schools, and I guess it would kind of be what like a DARE officer or like us, we're lead officers. You go and you're talking about bullying, you're talking about biased crimes and things like that. equality. They're trying to teach the kids now from young that we're all equal.
Yeah, and Mr. Barksdale, were you wanting to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, throw in my 2 cents there. Earlier, when you asked the question about what inspired me to become a police officer, I mentioned to you about the neighborhood I grew in and the representation. There weren't many representation, meaning officers of color. And I mentioned to you an officer, Maynard. And Maynard commanded respect because he was an African-American officer who walked in, and when he told you to do something, it was like your father telling you to do something, and you would stand up and you respect that. When I, my first year in law enforcement, the numbers was not equal to the communities that we were working in. So we had them, and still to this day, and I would think in most law enforcement, you have the majority are white, probably male, maybe females now, and your minorities are still the minorities, working in neighborhoods that they have to learn how or try to earn the respect of that community once they get in it. And you don't get that type of that much training in the academy. All this stuff you have to kind of learn on the job. I believe that law enforcement, because you mentioned impoverished neighborhood, when you mention impoverished neighborhood, I'm thinking people of color, brown and black, okay? And for me, I think law enforcement need to enhance their recruitment to try to include people to represent the neighborhoods and the community that they're going to police. I think that would be a great achievement. I think these officers will go in and they understand the culture. They can communicate with the people. They have some sort of dialogue and dynamics where people from not from that community would have. Okay, so that's just my two cents there on that.
Yeah, and if I can kind of pull some of that together, what I'm really hearing is the need for this community village mindset almost, right? Like if we look at where service jobs have found success, it's been where the community that's being serviced felt a level of comfort with those who were serving, right? And so like, even if we look in the world of education, there's a big conversation right now around terms like saviors complex, organizations sending in teachers to neighborhoods they've never been to, and then those teachers are in culture shock with the kids that they're servicing, and the kids can see right through it, and they know that those teachers are going to leave in 2 years anyway, and so there's not a relationship that's formed. And the teachers who are the most successful are either from that community or really take the efforts to learn about that community. So I'm going to assume that Mr. Burns, the reason why you had some success is, one, your willingness to do the work, but two, you're also, you started learning more about the community. You were engaging in that education process. And that's what anybody will have to do. If I'm grown up in the inner city and I go work in the suburbs, I'm gonna have to do the same thing to learn about that culture. And thinking about efforts that have been done before, right? Like growing up, there's the police athletic leagues in some cities. A lot of those have been removed, right? And so if a kid's into basketball and he's seeing, hey, the police put this together and they're servicing us more than just arresting us, right? And I know Officer Johnson because he's there every night and he helps me out. And so those relationships are formed, and I'm going to listen to them closer or quicker. Or even like we had in Kansas City, it was called night hoops. And the police officers would stay up till 2 a.m. and let us play basketball games. And these were like organized leagues to keep us out of trouble, And so I think like those kinds of efforts are available, community policing, creating that village mindset where you're not just dropping in, you're a part of the greater picture, along with the teachers, the doctors, the lawyers. It's all part of this same village and not just some import. Mr. Burns, were you wanting to say something?
Well, yeah, I mean, to that point, even, again, I grew up in a suburb and where most people out here hung out in their backyards. Well, when I went to the neighborhood that I was policing, everybody hung out in the front yards. Right? And that was very unusual for me.
On the stoop. That's what it's called, Brody, the stoop.
I had to learn that was normal. That was part of the community and the culture. And so I think, and I guess, man, I wouldn't trade those years of policing that community for anything. I learned so much about myself and about other people. And yeah, I mean, it was difficult, and I think it made me a really good cop. And I guess and I'm not trying to be argumentative, but to the point, I would hate to have not had that opportunity because I'm a white guy, you know, because I was a white cop. And I wanted to learn that, you know, so, and aren't we, if we start doing that, where you have Black officers, Black teachers, and Black communities, I mean, that seems like the opposite direction of what I would think.
Yeah, Brody, of course, it doesn't mean 100%. What I mean is you need a mixture. You know, you need some minority cops that are there to ease the tension. That's all.
More than none, like what we have now.
Like,
we definitely need more. Yeah,
Black cop, it's going to be much more difficult. If, let's say, you and you know, every neighborhood that is being affected, let's say, in wherever you were working, have only white officers there, it would be difficult. It would be a lot more welcoming if there was one or two Black cops in the mix, so to speak. That's all.
I think a lot of you were saying the same things. I mean, I could imagine, even as a teacher, right? Let's say I moved to Dallas, I might hit up Brody and say, what should I know about Plano or Dallas, you know, just as kind of a heads up. And it doesn't mean I couldn't be successful there, but I got somebody there who could show me the ropes, or at least be like, you might not want to say this, or people like to do this. They might like to eat on their front lawns, you know, or whatever that might be. Don't be alarmed when you see this. You know, even in teaching, I remember I taught at a predominantly white school for the first decade of my teaching career, and it was in a almost 86% white. And we started getting an influx of Black students. And some of the teachers they would hear the Black students talking louder. And so they were like, oh, are they arguing? And I said, no, that's just their culture. That's just how they talk. They're not fighting. And so when they kind of heard that and they said, oh, when you listen to the words, you just realize that they're just talking, you know? And so I think that those little things, same on the police force, if you have somebody who can just say, this is what you want to stay on. And that's what we call implicit bias training and all that kind of stuff. Now they have fancy words for it, but it needs to be done for any line of service work. I guess this kind of leads into my next question. When we look at whether we care for it or not, race plays a major impact in all of our lives. And we can be, oh, I'm colorblind, I don't see it. Okay, but it still plays an impact on how others may view you. How has your race impacted negatively or positively your time in law enforcement? And one of the reasons I want to just be explicit why I asked this question is, you know, Mr. Utsey, Mr. Baxter, and Mr. Barksdale, we know that in many Black communities, police are frowned upon, right? And so to be a Black police officer, I'm sure that you've experienced some conversation. And then Mr. Burns, of course, you know, you said you worked in neighborhoods where you were one of the only whites. So I'd be interested in knowing, in what ways did you see that impact, again, positively or negatively? And anybody can jump in.
Well, I mean, I can certainly say that, yes, being a police officer, an African-American police officer working in a predominantly African-American, Caribbean, Latino community, where it all depends on the situation. I can honestly say I have had very pleasant experience that when I responded to a scene, people felt comfortable of those neighborhoods to see an African-American officer responding to that, and they were open and very receptive. I would say that I think more so on the criminal elements that I had to approach. I would get the usual, you're a pig, you're Uncle Tom, you know, you're a sellout, okay? So that was pretty much the dynamic. So the people who are the law-abiding people, my experience for the most part was very receptive, very happy, and I think very comfortable that I was there to service and help them. I think where I got a lot of the most flack was from the criminal elements when it came to enforcement.
Yeah, anybody else want to interject?
Personally, I worked for most of my career, 22 years, in the narcotics division. So I was, from after my first year, I was in like plainclothes, you know, doing drug cases, so to speak. So I didn't have that huge exposure to working with the public, except for a period of time as a detective where I was in a precinct detective unit. And in that unit, you handled past crimes, basically. You know, you take reports of whether there be robberies or assaults and things like that, of that nature, and you respond and interview people, and of course make your reports. So I personally I cannot speak of any negativity. The time when I worked as a detective in the precinct, I was working in a predominantly Latino Black neighborhood, you know, in the Bronx. So I really felt comfortable, and my experience would be where people just respected me, because you're coming in from a different, I should say, different angle than being a uniform cop, being a detective, going into a situation where, you know, you're interviewing the victim of a crime and looking out for their interest. They are, of course, more accepting to you. So it's always that, you know, you're treated with that utmost respect, never anything negative.
I think, you know, obviously I'm talking 97 to 2002, when I was policing on the streets in a predominantly minority neighborhood. But it was like what Cleve talked about, where we actually walked the district. We walked it. We would park our cars. I worked midnight shift, so we would park the cars and go scouting. But it was an open air drug market. They were selling crack cocaine on the street corner. So it was that type of environment. And I tell you, I was still given the benefit of the doubt. There wasn't this automatic assumption that because I was a white cop that I was going to be, you know, violent or anything. I wouldn't envy those cops that are working that same district right now that are white cops, just because the assumption, I'm sure, is a lot different. The tension is so high in those environments right now. So for me on the streets, I knew I had to prove myself that I wasn't the bad guy that some people wanted me to be. But it wasn't like it is now. And then of course I moved to detective and then into federal law enforcement, and you know, it's just a lot different. So I don't think it impacted me there.
My experience is the same as Mr. Baxter, Mr. Barksdale. I'm out there. Back in the 70s, the police department was service orientated. And then when the crack wars came, they became enforcement orientated. But the same thing, the bad guys will call your names and stuff. And the good people of the community appreciate your presence. This way they can come home from work, you know, without being harassed or victimized. So it's the same as Mr. Baxter and Cedric said.
Ms. Palacio, Laura, I'd be interested in knowing, what do you, in Spain, what do you hear about the United States and police in the United States? Because you said that you don't have the race issues there, but like, what do you guys talk about what's going on in the US with police officers and citizens?
In the television, we always see the police there, that you have a lot of power. I think you can use a lot of things in the street, and in Spain we don't have big hand. I can't explain. We use, for example, we use the gun is so hard in Spain. It's difficult if you use the gun is for amazing situation. For the yes, it's difficult. I saw the television. I saw in America, and I say, "Oh, amazing! I go outside. Situation is so fast and so hard for the TV." Yes, yes, slowly, but. And we saw that it's so difficult the situation with the black, no, and the police, and we always say with my partner, I say that it's so difficult to be police in America because we saw that the people don't understand the situation. Always see in the television one situation, and you only see the end, but what happened before? No, in Spain you can say see the same, but it's not just for the police because you only see, okay, we put the hand in the knee, but you can hurt, you can see before, and the people say, oh, the police in America is so strong, is so aggressive. No, you have to see before, and maybe the concept change, but. We see you with a lot of respect, but very hard.
Mr. Baxter, that made you laugh a little bit.
Yes.
It's true or not?
But she talks about, yeah, I started, my thoughts went somewhere else. I said, yeah, here the cops are like cowboys and Indians.
But it's true or not it's true that we see the TV?
No.
Okay. And most crimes aren't solved in an hour. Okay.
Yeah, well, yeah, a lot of what you see in maybe nowadays for us, really, it's that's not the way we were taught policing per se. I think nowadays what we're having is a result of how the society has been changing, and therefore a lot of, like you alluded to, the police feeling more empowered, like they have more authority to do these things, whereby I feel like when I was a cop, we didn't really use our firearms like that. I think nowadays, from what I'm seeing, maybe it's because of now we're in the 21st century and everything is with the telephone videos all over.
Yes.
So maybe during my time, in the 80s, 90s, we didn't know what was going on in the rest of the country. But in New York, we didn't have that many police shootings. Usually whenever there is a police shooting, it's because the police was being fired up on, or something close to that, or else there was no reason for that to happen. Now I think it's more prevalent. I don't know if it's because of the like I said, the cell phones and the videos, or it's just perhaps maybe it's the changing of the times that we live in now, that we seen more and more that the police feel more empowered that they can do this. And so it makes you think that it's somewhat excessive abuse that we're seeing. I'm not sure, but I feel that way. Yeah.
I have to agree with Cleve, and it must be the time, the changing of the times, because clearly when I was on patrol, and I did about 5 years before I got into investigation. I was assigned to a couple of federal task forces towards the end of my career, actually towards most of them, my law enforcement career at the end. There was not a lot of gunplay, okay? And it seems like it's more prevalent now. Now, I don't know what the cause of this is. I mean, part of me makes me think that officers are clearly don't understand their use of force by law. because there's a time where you have to use reasonable force to restrain someone, and there's time when you're authorized to use what they call deadly physical force. Okay, now, and as Laura mentioned earlier, as she mentioned, when you look at these videos, you have to help to think, well, okay, we saw the end, but what happened prior to that? Okay, and fair point. But if to link this with martial arts, as we were talking about earlier, the last shooting incident that occurred. Okay, we haven't seen. I'm not sure if we've seen the whole video. And there's a thing in law enforcement. I'm not sure of it. I know definitely in New York, they say you don't want to be a Monday morning quarterback. Okay, meaning that you never know what you're going to do until you're in that situation. Okay. However, from the last shooting incident, okay, the one thing that I did see that was very, very clear was that it appeared that the officer was in reaching grab of that suspect. And that officer had managed to grab the t-shirt. Okay. Now, if you're that close to grab a t-shirt, okay, even if you thought that there was a weapon in that vehicle, you could have yanked that person back, which I think a trained martial artist would have engaged in. Okay, back to your point about martial arts and why it's important. I think if that officer had any extensive training in martial arts or restraint, I think that officer, if they were that experienced, would have handled that situation a little better. In fact, I'm almost certain that officer, a martial artist, would have not used deadly physical force, which was used in that situation.
I just want to add to that, real quick, Cedric, just real quick.
Okay.
In reality, I don't see myself having my gun drawn in a situation like that.
Exactly.
And when he
would have had two hands
in the car and he yanked him, you can't have your gun out doing stuff like that. You're gonna end up shooting somebody. If you have your gun like this and your hand is on him, you're going to shoot him. You can't. So my gun would not be in my hands. I'll be both hands on him, or yank to pull him down to the floor, whatever technique you want to use. There's no way in the world you could be trying to arrest him and have your gun drawn. It's impossible.
Right.
It's impossible. When I looked at that, I'm like, why are their guns drawn?
Yeah.
There's no reason in the world. There was no threat. When they responded, it was a dispute, and even if now you suspect, if he reached in the car and I suspect he's going to reach for a weapon, that's when I draw my gun and I shoot him.
Exactly.
But I wouldn't have approached him with my gun in my hand. That whole situation is like, that's what happens. This is the lack of training or the proper training, because I feel bad. I'm like, why was his gun? There's no way you can effect an arrest like that. I mean, you're asking for the guy to take the gun away from you. And that's what would happen, in a situation like that, where you're that close to someone with your gun. The gun is not to be used at that close range. The gun is for a distance. You're that close range, you're using your hands. Or maybe something else.
David, let me add something. We said before about the karate training and your level of fear. One thing we didn't mention earlier, the karate training gives us strategy. Okay, like Cleve said, strategy. Why did you have two hands to yank him back? I had an even better one. He attempted to open the car door. Why don't you push the shut? He couldn't get in the car. They don't have the fighting, even though you're not doing comite, it's still fighting strategy, and this is what your training background gives me. That was my advantage in the police department. Everything I did in the field was strategic. It got treated like I was in a match.
Like Cedric said earlier, in your training in the academy, you learn there was a test that we had to all pass. There was I think it was called justification. There were 10 questions, and if you had one of them wrong, you couldn't get your firearm. You wouldn't graduate. And it was all questions were when to use your firearm. What it referred to as deadlift physical force. And basically it came down to, you cannot use deadlift physical force unless it's being used against you. that was kind of like it in a nutshell.
Or against someone else. Or against someone else. If you're preventing someone from killing someone.
Or I'm preventing someone else, because you're using deadly physical force upon someone else, then I could use deadly physical force. But these situations where clearly you see there's no reason for that.
Mr. Burns, I see you thinking.
Contemplating.
And I also know that you, if I'm correct, were you with the FBI or did
I was in the task force with the FBI.
And Mr. Burns, you as well?
Well, I'm not really. I'm just a federal agent. Let's go there.
That's a federal agent. Mr. Burns.
Federal agent.
Burns is employed by the federal government. In a law enforcement capacity.
Exactly. Exactly.
Just a federal agent. All right, I'm freaked out. But anyway, Mr. Burns, things going through your mind because I see you over there thinking.
Well, having been part of an investigations before with officer-involved shootings, I would go back to how Cedric started his comments, which was, we don't know everything, right? And now I can agree with everybody here on a hypothetical scenario that they have described and agree that there are men, especially what Utsey said, where there's strategy to these things that are certainly lacking. And we see it in not even just this recent one, but in police traffic stops and all kinds of training things where they just, there's no strategy to it. And the tools on the tool belt, it seems to go from nothing to a pistol, Now, obviously the scenario or the situation we're talking about specifically, there was a taser deployed and things like that. But I think I would caution everybody to make sure that the facts of specific situations have to be known. And I think what made me laugh a little bit, because Laura being in another country, even as police recognize that we only get a snippet and you have to get a totality of circumstance before, and that obviously even happens in law enforcement in other countries, that they get judged on a snippet. So yeah, there's a lot of things that when I see any of the things that are making the news recently and you go, wow, I just really feel like I would have handled that differently.
Exactly.
I don't know, because as Cedric said, it is very easy to be the Monday morning quarterback. And there are facts and circumstances that we do not know in every single thing. Now, would they have changed the entire scenario? I don't know. But that would be, if we were to create a situation like we're describing here, then yeah, I would think my pistol would be holstered and there would be martial arts deployed and there would be, why did you make it all the way around the car? We used to teach takedowns that prevented, especially when you had multiple officers there, people from doing exactly what happened there. So yeah, I think right now I heard some criticism that, well, it was 3 days before a statement came out from the police. Well, that is not uncommon. I can tell you right now, that is actually recommended practice, that if you're involved in a shooting or a critical incident, you get 2 sleep cycles before you make a statement. So there's no possible way you can release a defensive statement of an officer prior to 3 days. And that's it, because there is a requirement. I tell you right now, if I was involved in a shooting, I'd go to the hospital, I'd check myself in as a traumatic injury because I was involved in an experience, and I'd be under a doctor's care for at least 3 days. And that would be what would happen, because that's a good procedure so that the actual facts are released. So that doesn't often go well for getting facts out that stop misinformation, but that is actual recommended defensive tactics instruction, right? I mean, Cleve, I'm sure you guys talked about that.
Brody, yeah, I know what you're saying. I did work also in a federal task force, a drug enforcement task force, and I was only involved with one shooting, and yes, and I was it became an issue for a moment because I was at the time in the task force when it happened, and so the laws are different. The federal laws are different from state and city laws when it comes to shootings. So whereby with the feds, I was told immediately, you don't answer any question to anybody. I was told immediately the assistant U.S. attorney was there or was on the phone, I don't remember. And the instructions was, no, you're kind of like a deputy DEA agent. So answer no questions. And then the duty captain from the NYPD shows up, and now NYPD's rules are different. You're supposed to answer all the questions from the duty captain. But of course, the higher authority prevailed. So I didn't have to answer any questions from any duty captain. Up to this day, I never answered any questions from any duty captain. It was so funny. But so the problem is different. But I agree with what the statement you made, though. If I, was to be involved with a shooting, yeah, you don't want to answer any questions because, to be very frank, even though a shooting is a couple of seconds and it's over, there's so much that took place that you can't recollect everything correctly.
Right. Okay.
And you will make mistakes and you will put yourself in an entrapment.
Okay. Let me throw in my 2 cents. In the Lieutenants Union, I was a union delegate. And my job was to respond to incidents with the members and give them representation. And the first thing I would say was, shut up, get your thoughts together, and we're going to go chronologically what happened that day. And this way, I'm not allowed to, I'm not a lawyer, so what he tell me is not privileged, but I could tell him to be quiet and get your thoughts together. And we had a captain, and I'm from Fort One, famous Fort Apache. We had a captain that the department hated because he would have said, Officer Baxter, you look a little rattled from this incident. Why don't you go get checked out, and then I'll take your statement when your delegate arrives. So I don't know about 3 days, Mr. Brody, but we do put a little time delay. I do my tap dance and stall while we let my client calm down, and then we give our statement to the duty captain, as Mr. Baxter said. So I had to represent some members, and some were easy, some were more difficult.
Well, and in a 24-hour news cycle, right? That doesn't work very well for the public.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
Yes.
They want everything now.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're gonna say it's less than 24 hours now because I can upload it onto social media and it go viral in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
No,
but not official explanation, though. Yeah.
They want answers.
Yes.
There's no answers at that stage.
Right.
Like Brody says, I agree with that. In 2 or 3 days, after you have gone to the hospital, get checked out, and maybe talk to your attorney.
Yeah.
Well, I know we could probably go with these stories all day, but I want to go back to something that we actually kind of started with. From what I take from what I know about all of you, you got into this job for service in the community, for bettering the community. And when we think about the community, we always think about the kids, right? We think about the young people coming up. Also, what I see is that I think all of you have taught or do teach martial arts to some capacity, and or you coach or whatever that may be. In what ways do you think that when we see the elements of society, we see kids going down pathways towards lives that could lead them into having to be confronted by your other career, your law enforcement career, right? Which is what you don't want, right? You would love to just come in and work and they say there's no problems, just chill. I don't think any law enforcement's like, man, I hope I have a really busy, hectic, intense, stressful day. I think you probably be like, yeah, I wouldn't mind a relaxed, quiet day. And so saying that to say, in what ways do you think martial arts can benefit young people and support the efforts to make a civil society?
Not even so much as martial arts, David. Back when I was a teenager, we had night center. It cost you a quarter. There are certain public schools were open in the evening, and we go there and play basketball, checkers, this and that. And the thing was to get them off the street, okay? And now, as far as the karate training, we don't just teach kick and punch at our dojo with Herb Wiles. We taught life skills. We taught them how to make decisions, make proper choices. So karate was the means and the mode of how we taught them life skills.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I totally agree with Doc Utsey. I mean, particularly now these days. I mean, and we talked about a lot of the police involved shootings, but if we go to the other side of the fence, I also believe that we see too many non-police shootings within these communities. And being a kid of the 70s, you know, if you had a beef with someone, you know, you guys would just duke it out, you know, punch it out, the best person wins, you know, you wipe your bruises, you walked away, you lost, that was it. You know, you didn't go home and you went to grab a gun and you went to do, you know, you wanted to escalate this situation. I think one of the best community service in martial arts, at least in my community, and I teach in a large Caribbean, African-American, and a percentage of Latino community, which is prevalent to some of these type of criminal elements, is the life lessons. I try to provide these kids in the community the tools. And for me, as conflict resolution, because that's what martial arts is all about. I mean, and I feel that maybe more so in the neighborhoods that I'm teaching, maybe than other neighborhoods where someone is teaching martial arts, I find myself saying, hey, the best option here is to walk away. De-escalate, don't escalate, because you don't know if the person has a weapon on them or not. So that I think that's for me, particularly in the community I teach, those type of lessons, it's maybe even more important than martial arts. I mean, it's a life lesson.
Absolutely. Ms. Palacios, and then I'll come back to Mr. Baxter, Mr. Burns. Ms. Palacios, how do you think karate can help kids stay away from trouble or crime? In Spain, how do you see karate helping kids in Spain?
In Spain, it's not mandatory in the school. You can learn the, karate outside the school or inside, but it's optional. I think it's important for them because in karate you teach respect for all, and the Bushido is so important. I think it's the basic. I think that is one sport or very, how can I say? The karate teach a lot in this situation that we speak now. It's not the same that the football or no. In karate is specific. This you respect to the other, to the partner. You can fight, but it's respect, and I think it's very good for the child. A lot of people think that the karate is aggressive, and but no. When they start this karate, we say okay, you have to say say Ray when you start the class. You have to put it in your seat. You have to say respect to the sensei, and I think it's very good for the children. It's a good idea. This is mandatory in the school, but we have to improve in this case.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mr. Burns, Mr. Baxter, what would you say?
You know, I think that as martial arts instructors, as sensei, we need to always deal with reality. And for me, you know, I teach my dojos are in primarily white, Indian, or Asian communities. And so for me, it is in a lot of ways breaking the preconceived notion that maybe who their attacker is going to be. Statistically, it's going to be someone of their same socioeconomic gender and race. So, I mean, that to break out of that and to deal with reality that it isn't the dark alley where you will never probably be where you're going to use your karate, but it is someone that you probably know or things like that. So dealing with reality, I think, is very important for senseis to do. And sometimes that requires going against what maybe they're hearing at home or, but again, you have to teach reality. And a big thing that we really try and do is make sure that if you taught a lesson in the dojo, okay, now little Timmy, how is that going to apply outside of the dojo? Make them tell you how bowing is going to make them better outside the dojo. And I think that goes to Laura's point 100% is that if we take the lessons that we all are teaching in our dojo, I know we are, and make them be applied outside, it can't help. It can only help. It can't hurt.
So, Mr. Baxter?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, karate is a martial art first and foremost. When I joined the dojo, I was told I was in a very traditional karate school. Traditional meaning that there was no tournaments, there was no competition. In fact, there were some questions that you used to have to study that they would ask you from the first test, and one of them is that what is karate? And the answer would be karate is a martial arts. It's Budo is the exact term, martial arts. It's not a sport like baseball or football. That's the way I was taught. So with that concept is that you have to teach humility. You have to teach humbleness. So people learn, the respect, like Laura talked about. You have to bow. You're showing appreciation for your fellow mankind. So when I'm working with Brody, I'm bowing to him, showing respect to him. He's gonna teach me. I'm gonna teach him. That's what karate is, and we need to try to instill that more now in the youth of today. And like you mentioned earlier, David, about like the PALs, Police Athletic Leagues. I don't know if those exist anymore, but I mean, there are organizations like that should provide an outlet where you could learn martial arts, from, and it could be a police officer from the local precinct teaching in that PAL. And that also will be part of like the police, community policing, and also at the same time teaching the kids how to respect one another, because that's what karate teaches us. I think that can go a long way.
Yeah.
In what you're asking about ways that, martial arts training could be effective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking now, in all aspects of life, there is a form of policing, whether it's the actual police or, when I'm the teacher of my classroom, I'm policing that classroom to some extent, right? In my dojo, the same way. And when I think about the sport aspect of karate, you have referees, you even have, to some extent, coaching, right? It can be somewhat policing their own athletes to follow the guidelines. And because we have this really diverse panel as far as experience in USA Karate, I wanted to ask this question because, and I'll start with you, Mr. Burns, as the head coach. I've seen some of your efforts to look towards like diversity recently within USA Karate. Why do you think that's important? I know I saw your statement you released and it was great, recently. And in what ways do you think that could help with the civility and the growth of USA Karate, those efforts that you're taking to try to diversify it?
Well, I mean, it's obvious that you do need a coaching staff, an environment that is reflective of the population, of the membership of the people that you're trying. Just as Cleve said earlier, oftentimes, a Black officer may be easier to identify with and relate with in a neighborhood. That could be very true of a Black coach or a Hispanic coach or a female coach with particular athletes. So I think that's kind of an obvious thing, is that you obviously need diversity among your coaching staff. You also need USA Karate or the I will leave that alone. But our team is so influential in the communities of karate, right? I mean, if you think about who the heroes are of young karate athletes in all of our dojos, there are U.S. team members. And so if that team is struggling with anything, then that's going to be reflected in the way it goes out to everyone. So I think it is a priority that our team, our coaching staff, our organization is working to really be the example they're supposed to be, to lead the way it's supposed to be, because it's our youth, it's our junior team will eventually become our senior team, and I want them to be respectful and inclusive and understand each other's cultures and all of that.
Absolutely, thank you. And then Mr. Utsey, Mr. Barksdale, Mr. Baxter, I know you all are referees. What efforts do you think maybe need to be taken to see more diversity amongst the field of the sport that you're supporting?
Well, let me jump in there first. Mr. Baxter can clean up. He's our chairman. But for me, since the puppet dragged me in, so at the end of my, say, competing career, you can either coach or become an official. And Mr. The Puppet realized a long time ago there wasn't enough minority representation in the referee corps. So he aggressively recruited me and others to pursue getting a license. So I think this, like it says, but it's going to have to be a progression. Either when you finish competing, you're either going to coach or you're going to become a judge. So that's what's happening right now.
Anyone else?
Well, Doc Utsey stole my thunder because
Okay.
since Sensei LaPupa was my sensei, he also actually recruited me into officiating. And I recall distinctly having a conversation with him, and I said, listen, Sensei, I want to coach. Why you want to do that? You know, he says, become an official. He says, you know, he said, we need more representation as officials. And he also thought that I would be, and he wasn't wrong. I mean, if it wasn't through the official program, I wouldn't have met as many people worldwide. I never thought in a million years that I would have so many friends all over the world through my involvement with WKF and whatever. So I don't regret that move. But in terms of diversity, I once again, I mean, if I was to look at USA Karate, I mean, and I don't know the percentage, so please don't take this as gospel, but I would say that we are lacking in diverse officials. I think it would be good for, as the same reason as Brody mentioned. We should have officials that represent the athletes, and I think that would help secure in people's mind. I'm not saying that no one. I mean, I don't think our officials are cheating or being slight. Yeah, we may have some. We have very good officials, and we have some bad officials, but it certainly, I don't believe it has anything to do with any bias by an official. But I think the perception would give us a better look, a better feel, and I think the athletes will feel better to see more diversity.
Could I ask a question that goes with that? And anybody can answer this, but like, you know, kind of in the way when you were looking at how to service the communities that you were going into, right? And like understanding the community and habits and things like that, and how maybe those who are coming into that community need to be coached up to understand the dynamics. Do you think in the same way that could be beneficial with the diversification of referees, where it's going to allow for a broader scope on how to view a wide range of athletes? You know, so maybe you recognize, hey, the way this athlete carries themselves, or the way this athlete, you know, it's not as alarming, or don't be alarmed by it, as long as they stay within the guidelines of competition. Do you think that's a benefit of diverse refereeing? Anybody?
I don't think that's necessary, David, because in karate competition, we are all taught the same. From the referee course, the behavior of everyone is the same. The behavior of athletes, we have the same expectation of all athletes. So I think regardless of where the athlete is coming from, there's a certain decorum that they have to have when they come into the arena, so to speak. So yes, of course, having diversity, so to speak, will perhaps make it easier for some minority athletes to acclimate. You know, they see other black and brown faces, they feel a little bit more comfortable, so to speak. I think that is important. Yes.
Like the concept of it, I was a little bit nervous by, but when we put the names together of who we were going to bring in, I immediately felt comfortable. I really appreciate all of you, and Laura, it was great meeting you as well, and just really thankful for your vulnerability and your openness. And I pray that this conversation will be educational for people. I learned a lot of things, and I also enjoyed watching you all interact with each other. That was cool to just be a fly on the wall. So thank you for supporting Karate for Change. And for all those watching, continue to have conversations, continue to push yourself outside your comfort zone, ask questions before you make accusations, and onward and upward. So thank you, everybody.